again, you've had tons of people, social media and otherwise, saying, oh, we have to stay in Afghanistan, we meaning NATO and the US, because of women's rights and so on. And yes, of course, women's rights under the Taliban severely diminished, and that's putting it mildly, right? But they say it in a way where they're trying to justify an occupation, right? They're saying like, oh, I'm not for the occupation, but no, there's no but. You're advocating for an occupation. And it's very interesting, again, because as I said, they never talk about Saudi Arabia, which, I mean, if you want to look at the women's rights there, Jesus. I mean, look at Idlib, in northern Syria, where they have Al-Qaeda rebranded now as HTS, and American ambassador openly saying that HTS is an ally. It's an American asset. Do you know how women are treated there? Same thing. Can't leave the house without a male. Banned from all political and other public professions. Just horrible. This is their revolution in Syria. This is the women's rights that they've been giving to Syria, right? Very, very progressive. So they want to get rid of a secular government in Syria under President Bashar al-Assad, and they want to replace it with people who are Al-Qaeda. I mean, there is no moderate rebels. This is a myth that they sold you. They brainwashed people with this. There are none left. Even if these so-called moderate rebels existed at one time, they do not exist anymore. So the choice is, do you want, a secular, stable government, or do you want Al-Qaeda? And the U.S. is saying, no, we want Al-Qaeda, which is not surprising given the fact who they've supported in the past, who they're still supporting. And all these people who are saying, oh, the U.S. should keep occupying Afghanistan to save women. Why do they never talk about Saudi Arabia? I mean, I'm not saying that the U.S. should go and occupy Saudi Arabia either, obviously, but they only focus on countries that the U.S. is occupying, right? And bizarrely, weirdly, they are never talking about U.S. assets or allies or client states, which includes, as I said, Saudi Arabia and places like Idlib in northern Syria, which are, ruled by these Takfiri, Salafi jihadists, and isn't that weird? Because if you really cared about this issue, you would talk about it everywhere, and you would talk about it especially regarding U.S. allies, because the U.S. would have more leverage with them, right? Saudi Arabia has a special relationship with the United States. It's much easier to influence Saudi Arabia, ostensibly, than it is the Taliban, right? And it's the same thing with human rights, right? They want human rights and democracy in Syria and Iran, and they call every country axis of evil because they won't bend the knee to U.S. imperialism. And when it comes to Israel killing Palestinians and treating them like dirt and like third-rate humans, not a word, right? And when it comes to the police brutality in Colombia, not a word. But then they have the time to talk about Cuba. So this proves one thing. They do not care about women's rights. They do not care about democracy. They do not care about police brutality. What they care about is maintaining U.S. hegemony and maintaining the U.S. boot on the neck of countries who will not yield to U.S. interests. And therefore, these people are fucking charlatans. They are talking out of their ass. So they are either ignorant or they are complicit. And in both cases, I mean, this is garbage. This is garbage. Not only are they lying about these countries, when they talk about Cuba or Syria, complete fucking CIA propaganda. They have no clue. They've never been to these places. They know nothing about the culture of these places. They don't speak the language. They have no connection to these places. Only source of information about Cuba, about Syria, about Iran is where? It's the TV. It's the CIA-approved state media. That's all the knowledge they have. And so they come and they talk, women's rights in so-and-so, and they talk about Afghanistan. The U.S. should not leave Afghanistan. But they never talk about Saudi Arabia, never talk about Colombia, Israel, Egypt, you name it, Turkey. Nothing. Isn't this bizarre how they only focus on states that are on the axis of evil list and not on the U.S. allies side? They're just complete charlatans, honestly. So I'm not interested in this kind of garbage. Really, it's. I mean, what a pathetic argument that is. I mean, do they not realize what invasion and occupation does to women? What do you think women's rights are like when they're living under occupation. I mean, seriously, think about this. You think their lives are bettered? No, this is ridiculous. People cannot even access basic resources. They cannot even live to begin with. You understand? When you're under occupation, the infrastructure is destroyed, like in Iraq, Afghanistan, much of Syria. People do not have bread to eat. There's no running water. The infrastructure has been decimated by sanctions and by bombs. So you are saying that people should live in a state of misery, and they should live under a boot, under a military occupation, for something that they won't even get under this military occupation. And when they actually had it better, maybe in some regards before. If you look at Syria, anyone who knows Syria, who's been to Syria, if you are talking about women's rights, they're a million times better under Bashar al-Assad, under the government. In Idlib, there are no women's rights. Women's rights is a joke. This doesn't exist under the rebels and terrorists that the United States is supporting. But weirdly enough, they're not going to condemn that. They're not going to talk about that, right? And so, of course, they go and repeat the same garbage with every country, and it's just weirdly enough, it aligns with CIA foreign policy. You can't make this up. You can't make it up, really. So, again, this is why I regrettably have to tell you that even some of these, like, very well-intentioned, or people who claim to be well-intentioned, right? And progressives, whatever that means, they're brainwashed. They're completely brainwashed with CIA propaganda. They're brainwashed with state media. They're taught which countries to hate. They're taught which countries to turn a blind eye to, and then they have learned these stereotypes and this propaganda about countries where the U.S. wants the resources and the land, and it's nothing to do with human rights or something. And, they're unfortunately neocons in a certain way. They think that the world is divided into good and bad, and the United States is the good, and it has the right, the moral right to go and interfere in every country. This is neocon thinking. This is what Dick Cheney and George Bush and Paul Wolfowitz say. The neoconservatives, they really believe this. And of course, they're making a buck at the same time, right? They think America is a force for good. Of course, it has to go to Afghanistan. Of course, it has to go to Iraq. It has to liberate people. And they believe the same shit. So you have people who say they're leftists, whatever that means in the United States. You don't have a left really anymore. And so they say they're progressives, whatever that means. And they are repeating neocon propaganda. They are saying that the United States has the moral right to go and invade another country and violate its sovereignty and its borders and its laws and culture in order to implement what they want, what the U.S. wants. This is obscene. This is ridiculous. This is imperialist colonial thinking. This is vile. This is disgusting. There's nothing progressive or left or supportive of women's rights or anything about that. Nothing. If you find yourself on the side of Dick Cheney, you need to do some real fucking self-evaluation.